Okay, so when I say Noah's Ark, you're probably picturing it, right? The huge boat, the big flood, all the animals lined up two by two. It's one of the most famous stories ever told. But what if I told you that behind that simple picture, there's a massive mystery, one that involves incredible engineering, ancient geography, and a whole lot of faith?
I mean, think about it. The whole idea is just epic. A single ship built to save everything, to literally save the world. It's an amazing concept, but it's in the details, the how and the where, that things get really interesting. And that's where our journey begins.
So that leads us to the big questions, doesn't it? Where did this incredible journey even start? I mean, where do you build a boat that size? And of course, the one everyone asks, where did it finally land? You know, most people just skip to the end of the story, to the landing spot, but not us. We're going to look at the whole shebang, from the blueprints to the construction zone, all the way to its final legendary resting place.
And you know what's wild? This story is ancient, like way older than you might think. And it's not just from one tradition. The idea of a giant world-resetting flood, it pops up all over the place. You've got the Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, which is thousands of years old. Then, of course, you see it in Genesis and later in the Quran with the story of Prophet Nuh. It's almost like it's this deep, shared memory that humanity just can't shake.
Okay, so first things first, let's talk about the Ark itself. Before we can figure out where it went, we've got to understand what it was. And when you dig into the ancient texts, you find something pretty amazing. This wasn't just some fairy tale boat. The descriptions point to a surprisingly clever piece of engineering. Now, depending on which sacred text you're looking at, the level of detail is a little different. The book of Genesis, for example, gets super specific. It lays out the exact dimensions in cubits. A cubit, by the way, was an old-school unit of measurement, basically the length from your elbow to the tip of your fingers. The Quran, on the other hand, confirms the whole story, but zooms out a bit. It focuses more on the why, the spiritual lesson, than the nitty-gritty measurements.
So if we take those biblical numbers and do the math, we're looking at a gross volume of around 40,000 cubic meters. Let that sink in for a second. This was no little fishing boat. We are talking about an absolutely massive, colossal structure.
Okay, get ready for this because it's going to blow your mind. To put that size into perspective, the Ark's volume was pretty much the same as the Titanic's. Yeah, the Titanic. Isn't that an incredible comparison? It just yanks this ancient story right into our modern understanding of what a megastructure is.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just big for the sake of being big. The design itself was brilliant. In fact, modern naval engineers have looked at these ancient proportions and been seriously impressed. They found that the design was incredibly practical. This thing wasn't just huge, it was smart. It was built to survive.
And the genius is really in the details. That length-to-height ratio, it's almost perfect for handling the stress from gigantic waves. And its shape, that kind of boxy design, wasn't for speed. No, it was all about stability. It was made to float and stay upright, period. Then you have 3 internal decks that basically acted as massive braces for the whole structure. And to top it all off, it was coated inside and out with pitch, a natural waterproof sealant. So from an engineering standpoint, this thing was a floating fortress.
All right, so we've got a blueprint for this massive, unsinkable ship. The next question is obvious, isn't it? Where on earth could you possibly build something like this?
Let's put on our ancient project manager hats for a second. What would you need? Well, first, you'd need wood, a lot of wood. The texts mention something called gopher wood, which most scholars think was a kind of cypress. So you need a huge forest. Second, you've got to be near a big body of water to actually launch this behemoth. And third, it has to make sense geographically, right? It needs to be somewhere in the ancient Near East where the story is set.
Okay, so based on that checklist, a few main theories have popped up. Mesopotamia, right between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, is a classic contender. Then there's the Black Sea region, where some geologists think a real, catastrophic flood happened way back when. The Gulf of Aqaba is another possibility. It had access to major trade routes and timber. And hey, maybe it was built right near where it landed. Each theory has its pros and cons, like pieces of a giant puzzle.
So we've puzzled over where it was built. Now, let's follow the journey to its final stop. This is the part of the story everyone knows and loves, the hunt for the Ark's final resting place. It's a search that has literally drawn explorers to the mountains of the Near East for centuries.
And when you look at the sacred texts, 2 main candidates stand out, and they're both in modern-day Turkey.
The biblical tradition, in Genesis, points to the mountains of Ararat. That's a huge snow-capped volcanic range. But the Quranic tradition names Mount Qudi, which is a bit further south, closer to what we now know as Syria and Iraq.
And listen, this search isn't just for treasure hunters or anything like that. It's a topic of serious academic work. What you're seeing here is the logo for a university in Agri, the province right at the foot of Mount Ararat. Researchers there are still studying the geology, the history, and the folklore of the area. It just goes to show you how this ancient story is still a really compelling subject for modern science. But what if the clue isn't on a map at all? What if it's in the language? Some scholars have suggested that the word Qudi might not actually be the name of a specific mountain. Instead, it could just be a word that means a high place or fertile ground. And if that's true, well, that changes everything. It means the landing spot wasn't about a particular peak, but about finding a safe, high place to start over. The story becomes less about geography and more about symbolism.
So, we've looked at the engineering, we've explored the geography, which brings us to the biggest question of all. Why? Why are we still so fascinated by this story thousands of years later? Maybe looking for the physical boat is kind of missing the real point.
Because when you get right down to it, the reason the story of the Ark has stuck around for millennia isn't because it's a history lesson or an engineering manual. It's lasted because it's something so much more profound.
One of our sources puts it perfectly. It says that all those details, the ship's structure, its width, its length, they have no value next to the main message. So, what is that main message then?
Well, it's a story about incredible resilience, isn't it? It's about having faith when it feels like the whole world is literally ending. It's a powerful symbol of wiping the slate clean, of getting a second chance. It's a warning, for sure, about where we can go wrong, but more than that, it's a promise. The promise that even after the worst possible disaster, life can and will begin again.
And that really leaves us with one final question to think about. Maybe the real search isn't for a lost ship made of ancient timber sitting on a mountain somewhere. Maybe the real search for Noah's Ark is a search for its timeless meaning in our own lives. A search for faith, for renewal, and for what it means to get a second chance.